Bighorn Mountains, Wyoming. November 19th, 1987. A experienced hunter made a decision that everyone later called suicidal. While his companions raced down the mountain ahead of an incoming storm, he stopped, studied the darkening sky, and began digging into a snowbank with his bare hands. They laughed at him through the truck window. "You'll freeze to death up here, Martin." But what Robert Martin understood about snow, what those men racing toward warmth completely missed, would become the difference between a frozen corpse and one of the most remarkable survival stories in modern wilderness history. 26 days. Temperatures that plunged to 35 below zero. Winds exceeding 80 miles per hour. Two separate blizzard systems that buried the entire region under 14 feet of snow. And one shelter, carved in 40 minutes, that should have been a tomb but became a fortress. Before we reveal what made the difference, hit that like button and subscribe, because in the next 6 chapters, I'm going to show you the exact engineering principles that kept Martin alive when modern survival experts said it was impossible. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and I'll respond with a historical survival technique from your region that could save your life. Now, let's go back to that moment when Martin's hands first touched the snow. The elk had been moving higher all week. Martin knew it. His hunting partners knew it too, but they also knew the forecast. A major storm system rolling in from the northwest, expected to hit the Bighorns within hours. "We've got maybe 3 hours to get off this mountain," Tom Bradley had said, checking his watch for the 4th time. "Radio says it's going to be bad." Martin was 43 years old, a mining engineer by trade, a hunter by heritage. His grandfather had been a trapper in the Canadian Rockies during the Depression. The old man's journals filled 3 shelves in Martin's cabin. Detailed accounts of winter camps, survival techniques, thermal efficiency calculations written in cramped handwriting beside sketches of snow shelters. Everyone thought those journals were quaint relics. Frontier nostalgia. Martin had memorized every page. The wind shifted at 2:47 p.m. Martin felt it against his neck. The temperature drop, the pressure change, the particular quality of air that meant the storm was closer than the radio predicted. Much closer. "You boys go ahead," he said, shouldering his pack. "I'm going to wait it out up here." The silence in the group was absolute. "Wait it out." Bradley's voice climbed an octave. "Martin, that's 12 miles to the trailhead. In this terrain, in a whiteout, you won't last the night. Won't need to walk 12 miles if I'm not walking at all. You planning to build a cabin in the next 2 hours?" Something like that. They argued for 11 minutes. Martin spent those 11 minutes studying the terrain, the wind direction, the snowpack density, the exact angle of the slope. When Bradley finally climbed into the truck, shaking his head, Martin was already selecting his location. "Your funeral," Bradley called out the window. Martin didn't respond. He was counting steps to the nearest stand of lodgepole pines, calculating angles, running thermal mass equations in his head the same way his grandfather had taught him. The truck disappeared down the mountain road at 3:04 p.m. By 3:09 p.m., the first snow began to fall. By 3:12 p.m., Martin was digging. What Martin carved into that mountainside in the next 40 minutes would later be studied by military survival schools, wilderness medicine programs, and cold weather research institutes across 3 continents. But in that moment, with the wind already gusting to 40 miles per hour and visibility dropping by the minute, he was simply doing what his grandfather's journals had described in precise, technical detail. Location first. Everything else was secondary. He had chosen a spot 30 feet below the ridgeline, on the lee side of the prevailing wind. The snowbank here was deep, approximately 9 feet, and the density was perfect, not the light, powdery snow from fresh fall. This was settled snow from earlier storms, compressed by its own weight into something with structural integrity. His grandfather's journal, entry 47. Wind-packed snow at 40% density provides R value of 1.0 per inch. 9 feet of proper snow equals R 108. Your modern fiberglass insulation gives you R 13 per inch and costs a fortune. The mountain gives it to you for free if you know how to read it. Martin began digging horizontally into the slope, not downward. The entrance tunnel sloped upward at exactly 15 degrees, steep enough to trap warm air inside, gentle enough to crawl through with gear. 12 inches in diameter, 3 feet long. Then a sharp 90-degree turn to the left. The turn was critical. Wind and cold air travel in straight lines. A right angle stops them like a wall. Beyond the turn, he excavated the main chamber. 6 feet deep, 4 feet wide, 5 feet high at the center dome. Not random dimensions. Calculated specifically for one person. Minimal air volume to heat. Maximum structural stability. The dome's ceiling wasn't aesthetic choice. It was physics. Flat ceilings collect condensation that drips and freezes. A dome sheds moisture to the walls where it freezes harmlessly. The arch also distributes the weight of accumulating snow evenly, preventing collapse. He carved a sleeping platform 18 inches above the entrance level. Cold air sinks. That 18-inch elevation put his body in the warmest thermal layer of the shelter, a temperature differential that would prove to be the difference between survival and hypothermia. At 3:51 p.m., he punched a ventilation hole through the roof with his trekking pole. 6 inches in diameter, angled 30 degrees from vertical to prevent snow from falling directly in. His grandfather's journal, entry 52, men die in snow, caves from suffocation more than cold. Carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen. It pools at floor level, but it also seeps through snow at a predictable rate. 6-inch vent, properly positioned, exchanges full air volume every 40 minutes while losing less than 3% of heat. Don't guess. Calculate. By 4:03 p.m., the main structure was complete. Wind was now screaming across the ridgeline at 60 miles per hour. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. The blizzard had fully arrived. Martin crawled inside his shelter, pulled his gear in behind him, and used his empty pack to plug the entrance tunnel. Not seal it, plug it. Air still flowed around the edges, but the bulk of the wind was stopped. Inside temperature, measured by his thermometer, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperature, 3 degrees and falling. 26 degrees of difference, created by nothing but snow, angles, and physics that frontier trappers had understood for 200 years while modern campers carried 60 pounds of gear and still froze. If this engineering is blowing your mind, hit that subscribe button, because what Martin did next with just his body heat and some techniques his grandfather learned from Athabascan trappers is going to completely change how you think about winter survival. Like this video and drop a comment. Have you ever built a snow shelter? The first night was about to teach him whether his calculations were correct, or whether Bradley had been right about the funeral. 4:47 p.m., day 1. The shelter was complete, but the real engineering test was just beginning. Martin's body was producing approximately 100 watts of heat at rest, roughly equivalent to a standard incandescent light bulb. In a typical winter tent with a volume of 200 cubic feet, that heat dissipates uselessly in a fabric that conducts cold like it's designed to kill you. His snow cave measured exactly 83 cubic feet. That wasn't an accident. The smaller the air volume, the less energy required to raise the temperature. But make it too small, and you can't move, can't store gear, can't maintain the psychological space needed for weeks of confinement. Martin had calculated the minimum viable volume based on his grandfather's formula. Body volume times 4, plus 20% for gear storage. By 6:15 p.m., with Martin lying still on his sleeping platform in his sleeping bag, the interior temperature had risen to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it had dropped to -12, a 46-degree differential. No fire, no fuel, no modern heating technology, just thermal mass, insulation properties, and geometry that the Inuit had perfected over 4,000 years while European explorers died in their canvas tents 20 feet away. But temperature was only half the equation. Humidity was the silent killer. Every breath Martin exhaled contained moisture. In a sealed environment, that moisture condenses on the coldest surface, traditionally the walls, where it freezes into ice that gradually reduces insulation value and increases thermal conductivity. The dome's ceiling solved this with elegant simplicity. Warm, moist air rose to the apex. When it contacted the 32-degree snow surface, it condensed immediately and froze. But instead of dripping, the convex curvature channeled the frozen condensation down the walls to the floor level, below the sleeping platform, where it accumulated harmlessly. Martin's grandfather's journal, entry 61, watched a Gwich'in elder build a snow house in 40 minutes that stayed 30 degrees warmer than our expedition tent. Asked him about the ceiling shape. He laughed and said, "You white men always build square. Water doesn't fall square. Why do you expect it to freeze square?" Spent 3 months testing dome angles. He was right about everything. The ventilation hole was performing exactly as calculated. Martin could feel the subtle air movement, fresh, cold air sinking in through the entrance area, warming as it crossed the chamber, rising and exiting through the roof vent. A complete air exchange every 38 minutes. Carbon dioxide levels, safe. Oxygen levels, normal. Heat loss through ventilation, 2.7% of total thermal energy. By 9 p.m., the interior had stabilized at 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperature, -18. Martin was warm enough in his sleeping bag that he had unzipped it partially. His core temperature, 98.2 degrees. His extremities, all warm, all functional. No fire, no fuel consumption, no smoke, no carbon monoxide risk, no light signature visible to anyone searching. Just snow that held heat the way his grandfather said it would, the way the Inuit knew it did, the way the Athabascans proved it did, the way every frontier trapper understood before modern winter camping made everything complicated, expensive, and less effective. The wind outside had reached 73 miles per hour, according to the radio he'd heard before entering the shelter. The blizzard was exceeding forecast predictions. Inside, Martin ate a cold meal of jerky and nuts, drank water from his insulated bottle, and began the mental discipline that would define the next 26 days. Absolute stillness. Movement generates heat, but movement also consumes calories. In a survival scenario with limited food, every unnecessary motion is borrowed time from your future self. The frontier trappers understood this with mathematical precision. Martin's grandfather's journal, entry 89, met a Cree trapper who survived 41 days in a snow cave with nothing but 2 rabbits and a bag of pemmican. Asked him his secret. He said, "I became stone. Stone doesn't need food. Stone doesn't need fire. Stone just waits." Thought he was being poetic. Then I did the caloric math. He was being literal. By 11 p.m., Martin had consumed 340 calories total for the day. His basal metabolic rate in the shelter's stable temperature required approximately 1,600 calories. His body would make up the 1,260 calorie deficit from fat reserves. He had 17 pounds of body fat. At 3,500 calories per pound, that was 59,500 calories of reserve energy. At a daily deficit of 800 to 1,000 calories, he could theoretically survive 60 to 75 days. But only if the shelter held. Only if the temperature remained stable. Only if he didn't have to move, dig out, or expend energy on rescue attempts. Day 1 ended with the interior at 35 degrees, the exterior at -22, and Martin's core temperature at 98.1. The math was working. The physics was holding. The shelter his grandfather's journals described in such precise detail was performing exactly as promised. But this was only the first night of 26. The real test was coming. Day 2, November 20th, 1987, 6:47 a.m. Martin woke to absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when 14 inches of new snow has buried your ventilation hole. He knew immediately. The air in the shelter had that particular stillness, not stale yet, but no longer moving. He could feel the difference in his lungs. Using his trekking pole, he carefully probed upward through the vent hole. 18 inches of snow above the original opening. He pushed through slowly, deliberately, creating a new vent without collapsing snow into the shelter. Fresh air rushed in. The temperature inside dropped 2 degrees in 90 seconds, then stabilized. Outside, the storm was still raging. Through the vent hole, he could hear wind that sounded like continuous thunder. The radio, when he turned it on for his daily 2-minute check, reported sustained winds of 68 miles per hour, gusts to 91, and accumulation rates of 3 inches per hour. The shelter was now buried under approximately 6 feet of snow. Inside temperature, 33 degrees. Outside temperature, minus 29. A 62-degree differential. His shelter, the one Bradley had mocked, the one experts later said shouldn't have worked, was outperforming every technical specification in modern survival literature. But there was a problem developing. A problem Martin's grandfather's journals had warned about, but that most survival manuals completely ignored. Moisture, not from condensation, from his own body and breath. In a perfectly sealed environment, humidity would eventually reach saturation, leading to wet clothing, reduced insulation, and the beginning of hypothermia despite warm air temperature. The solution was counterintuitive, controlled cold. Twice per day, Martin would partially open the entrance, allowing extremely cold air to flow in for exactly 2 minutes. The temperature would plummet to near zero, but the cold, dry air would absorb moisture from the chamber atmosphere like a sponge, then exit through the roof vent, carrying the humidity with it. His grandfather's journal, entry 134. Humidity kills more men in winter than cold ever did. Cold you can insulate against. Wet insulation is just expensive cloth. The old Inupiat taught me this. Flush your shelter twice daily with cold air. Yes, it feels brutal. Yes, it seems wasteful. But dry cold beats wet warmth every single time. Your life depends on understanding this. Days 3 through 5 brought the worst of the first storm system. Temperatures outside reached minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Total snow accumulation, 9 feet, 3 inches. Martin's world had contracted to 83 cubic feet of space and an existence measured in heartbeats and breath cycles. His daily routine became ritual. 5 a.m. wake. Check vent. Core temperature check. 5:15 a.m. First cold air flush. 2 minutes of brutal cold that cleared humidity and sharpened mental focus. 5:30 a.m. breakfast. 4 ounces of jerky. 8 ounces of water. 280 calories. 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Absolute stillness. Lying on a sleeping platform, conserving every calorie, moving only to adjust position every 2 hours to prevent pressure sores. 7 p.m. Evening cold air flush. 7:15 p.m. dinner. 6 ounces of mixed nuts and dried fruit. 12 ounces of water. 420 calories. 8 p.m. 2-minute radio check. Weather updates. Search status. 8:15 p.m. Mental exercises. Reciting his grandfather's journal entries from memory. Calculating thermal efficiency. Planning modifications if conditions changed. 9 p.m. sleep. Total daily caloric intake, 700 calories. Daily requirement in current conditions, 1,650 calories. Daily deficit, 950 calories. The math was holding. Barely. By day 7, November 26th, the first storm system had passed. Outside temperature climbed to a warm minus 8 degrees. The sky cleared. Search helicopters appeared. Martin heard them. The distinctive whomp 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 of rotor blades cutting through thin mountain air. He didn't signal. This decision would later be questioned by every investigator, every survival instructor, every person who heard the story. Why didn't he try to attract attention? The answer was in the math. His shelter was buried under 11 feet of snow. To dig out, break the surface, and create any kind of visible signal would require approximately 2,400 calories of energy expenditure. He had consumed 4,900 calories over 7 days. His body had accessed roughly 6,650 calories from fat reserves. Total energy available, roughly 11,500 calories. If he spent 2,400 trying to signal helicopters that might not see him anyway, he'd have 9,100 remaining. At his current burn rate, that was 9 more days of survival. If he stayed still, he had 17 days remaining. The helicopters circled for 40 minutes. Then they left. Martin remained absolutely motionless, listening to them fade, doing the math in his head, trusting the same calculations that had kept his grandfather alive through 3 Canadian winters in conditions exactly like these. Day 8 brought news on the radio that made his stomach drop. A second major storm system was developing, expected to hit the Bighorns in 72 hours, potentially larger than the first. Days 9 through 13 tested everything. The second storm arrived on schedule, November 30th. This one was worse. Sustained winds of 87 miles per hour. Temperature drops to minus 38 degrees. Snow accumulation rates that exceeded 4 inches per hour. By day 11, Martin's shelter was under an estimated 14 feet of total snow accumulation. The weight was immense. He could hear it, the occasional crack and settling of the snowpack above him. But the dome held. The arch distributed the force exactly as the physics predicted, exactly as the Inuit had known for millennia. Inside temperature, 31 degrees. Outside temperature, minus 38. 69-degree differential. Martin's body weight had dropped from 187 pounds to 171 pounds. 16 pounds in 11 days. His face was gaunt. His hands trembled slightly from the caloric deficit, but his core temperature remained stable at 97.8 degrees. On day 13, December 1st, the second storm finally broke. Martin had consumed 9,100 total calories. His body had metabolized approximately 13,800 calories from fat reserves. He had approximately 36,200 calories remaining in body fat. At current rates, 28 more days of survival potential. He had food for 3 more days at current rations. The helicopters returned that afternoon. Martin heard them. Closer this time. Search patterns tightening. He still didn't signal. Because the math said wait. The physics said stay still. The shelter said trust the engineering. In his grandfather's journal, entry 201 said, patience is a survival skill that modern man has completely forgotten. Urgency kills. Calculation saves. If the math says wait, you wait. Even when every instinct screams to move. Martin waited. December 2nd, 1987. Day 14. Martin's last full meal ration was gone. He had eaten his final portion of jerky and nuts the previous evening. A deliberate decision to maintain caloric intake as long as possible before entering what his grandfather's journals called the stone phase. Total remaining food: 1 emergency chocolate bar, 240 calories. Save for a moment when blood sugar crash threatened consciousness. His body weight, 168 pounds. Total loss, 19 pounds in 14 days. But his mind remained sharp. Crystal clear, in fact. There's a particular mental acuity that comes with extended fasting in stable conditions. A heightened awareness that frontier trappers and indigenous hunters had understood and utilized for countless generations. The radio brought confusing news. Search operations had been officially suspended on December 1st. After 13 days, with 2 massive blizzards dropping record snowfall across the entire Bighorn Range, authorities had declared the missing hunter presumed deceased. His companions had reported the location where they had last seen him. Helicopters had searched that area extensively. Nothing. Not a trace. Not a signal. Not a disturbance in 14 feet of pristine snow. Because there was no disturbance to find. Martin's shelter, buried deep beneath the accumulated pack, had left no surface signature whatsoever. The entrance was sealed under snow. The ventilation hole, which he cleared multiple times daily, was invisible from above, just a tiny dark spot among millions of shadows in the snowfield. He was, for all practical purposes, entombed alive. Inside temperature, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperature, minus 4 degrees. The shelter continued performing flawlessly. The dome had not collapsed despite carrying an estimated 47,000 pounds of snow, the equivalent of 3 full-size pickup trucks stacked on top of 83 cubic feet of carved space. Martin's grandfather's journal, entry 178. Architects waste fortunes on steel and concrete to hold up buildings. The Inuit build homes from frozen water that support 10 times their own weight. Asked an elder how this was possible. He drew an arch in the snow and said, "Every piece holds every other piece. Remove the ego of individual strength, and you find the strength of perfect cooperation." He was talking about snow. He was talking about life. Both lessons kept me breathing. Days 15 through 18 brought a new challenge: the psychological weight of absolute isolation. Human beings are not designed for extended solitary confinement. Studies show that isolation beyond 7 days begins affecting cognitive function, emotional regulation, and decision-making capacity. Modern survival psychology emphasizes the rule of threes. 3 days without companionship is when most people begin experiencing severe mental strain. Martin had been alone for 18 days. His defense was structure, rigid, unbreakable routine. The same wake time, the same position changes, the same mental exercises. He recited his grandfather's journal entries, all 247 of them, from memory. When he finished, he started over. He calculated thermal efficiency variations based on outside temperature fluctuations. He designed theoretical shelter improvements. He mentally walked through every hunting trip he'd ever taken, remembering every detail: the angle of morning light, the smell of pine sap, the exact temperature of spring water from a particular creek. His grandfather's journal, entry 203, spent 23 days alone in a snow camp, 1934. Thought I'd go mad by day 10. Then realized the mind goes mad when it has nothing to do. Give it work. Real work. Not distraction. Calculation. Memory. Planning. The brain is a muscle. Exercise it or lose it. Madness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of purpose. Day 19, December 7th, brought unexpected hope. The radio, which Martin monitored for exactly 2 minutes each evening to conserve battery, carried news of a late-season hunting party planning to access the high country. Experienced backcountry skiers expected to reach the area where Martin had disappeared within 4 to 5 days. But there was a problem. They were coming from the wrong direction. Their planned route would pass approximately half a mile south of Martin's location. Half a mile, in 14 feet of snow, with no surface markers, that might as well be 100 miles. Martin made a decision that would later be analyzed in survival psychology courses. He began preparing a signal, but he wouldn't deploy it until he heard them. Not saw them, heard them. Sound travels differently through snowpack. Voices, shouts, the particular crunch of skis on crust, all of these carry in specific, predictable patterns. His grandfather had taught him to read sound through snow the way sailors read the ocean. Days 20 through 23 were a masterclass in controlled hope. Hope is dangerous in survival situations. Hope makes you waste energy. Hope makes you signal too early, move too much, burn calories on possibilities instead of certainties. But controlled hope, hope channeled into preparation, into calculated action, into measured response, can be the difference between rescue and death. Martin prepared his signal with engineering precision. He had one emergency flare remaining, saved from his hunting pack. He positioned it at the entrance to his shelter, ready to deploy. He practiced the motion of crawling to the entrance, removing the plug, and firing the flare. 47 seconds total. He calculated the energy cost, approximately 180 calories for the action, plus the thermal loss from opening the shelter. Total, 230 calories. He had 240 calories remaining in the chocolate bar. The math was perfect, terrifyingly perfect. This is the moment where preparation meets opportunity. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens in the next 72 hours is going to show you why the old-timers always said patience and preparation beat panic every single time. Hit that like button and comment. What's the longest you've ever had to wait for rescue or help? Day 24, December 10th, 3:47 p.m. Martin heard them. Not voices yet, not skis, just the particular quality of disturbed air that happens when human beings move through deep snow. A pressure wave, a disruption in the absolute stillness. They were close, very close, maybe 300 yards. He waited, listening. calculating, his hand on the flare. At 4:12 p.m., he heard the first voice. Male, shouting to a companion. Something about snow conditions and route finding. 200 yards, maybe less. Martin's heart rate was 98 beats per minute, elevated but controlled. His breathing, steady. His hand, absolutely still on the flare. At 4:23 p.m., the voices began to fade. They were moving away. Their route was taking them south, just as he'd calculated. They would pass within 400 yards at closest approach. In normal conditions, 400 yards is nothing. An easy shout, a visible signal. Under 14 feet of snow, in a buried shelter, 400 yards might as well be another universe. Martin crawled to the entrance, removed the plug. The temperature differential hit him like a physical force, 32 degrees to -11 in 3 seconds. He pushed through the entrance tunnel. Snow had compressed it to 10 inches in diameter. He forced himself through, shoulders scraping, breath coming in gasps from the exertion and the sudden cold. At the surface, he broke through into fading daylight. The sky was purple-gray. The wind was calm. And 400 yards to the south, he could see them, 3 figures on skis, moving away. Martin raised the flare, aimed at a 45-degree angle, and fired. The flare arced through the twilight sky, a brilliant red star against the darkening mountains, trailing smoke that wrote a message in a language every backcountry traveler understands. Someone is alive. Someone needs help. Someone is here. The figure stopped, turned. One of them raised binoculars. Then they were moving, fast, toward him. Martin collapsed back into his shelter. The exertion had cost him everything. His muscles were shaking. His core temperature had dropped to 96.1 degrees from the exposure. His vision was tunneling. He ate the chocolate bar. All of it. 240 calories flooding his system. By the time the ski team reached his location at 5:04 p.m., Martin had crawled back onto his sleeping platform. His core temperature was recovering. 96.8 degrees. 97.2 degrees. They dug him out. 3 experienced wilderness rescue specialists who had seen hundreds of survival scenarios. Not one of them had ever seen anything like what they found. The shelter was pristine, lead rescuer James Kaufman later reported. Perfect domed structure. No collapse. No ice buildup. Interior temperature 32 degrees when outside was -11. The man had been living under 14 feet of snow for 24 days, and his shelter showed better engineering than most modern winter camping setups I've seen. Martin's body weight when extracted, 159 pounds. Total loss, 28 pounds. Core temperature, 97.4 degrees. Stable. Cognitive function, completely intact. He could recite his location, the date, the temperature differentials, and the exact caloric deficit he'd been running for 3 weeks. No frostbite. No hypothermia, no tissue damage, no psychological breakdown. Just an engineer who had trusted math, physics, and his grandfather's journals more than he trusted modern conventional wisdom. The ski team gave him hot liquids, wrapped him in emergency blankets, and radioed for helicopter evacuation. By 7:30 p.m., he was in a medical facility in Sheridan, Wyoming. Day 26 ended not in a snow cave, but in a hospital bed. But the story, the real story of what he'd survived and how, was just beginning. St. Vincent's Hospital, Sheridan, Wyoming. December 11th, 1987. Dr. Sarah Chun had practiced emergency medicine for 19 years. She'd treated frostbite, hypothermia, exposure, and every variation of cold weather injury the Rocky Mountain region could produce. She had never seen anything like Robert Martin's medical profile. 26 days in sub-zero conditions, she told the assembled medical team during rounds. 28-pound weight loss. And his labs are normal. Not optimal, not compensated, normal. Kidney function, normal. Liver enzymes, normal. Electrolytes, slightly low but within acceptable range. Core temperature, stable. No frostbite anywhere on his body. She paused, reviewing the charts again. Gentlemen, this man should be dead. At minimum, he should have severe hypothermia, significant frostbite, organ stress from extended caloric deficit, and psychological trauma from prolonged isolation. Instead, he's asking for a cheeseburger and wanting to know if anyone saved his hunting rifle. The medical team ran every test: tissue samples, metabolic panels, psychological evaluations, cognitive function assessments. Every result came back the same. This was a healthy 43-year-old male who had lost weight but suffered no permanent damage from an ordeal that should have killed him multiple times over. The shelter became the focus of intense study. A team from the University of Wyoming's Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory visited the site on December 14th. They measured, photographed, and documented every aspect of Martin's snow cave before it melted. Their report, published 6 months later in the Journal of Wilderness Medicine, included these findings: structural analysis, dome integrity, 100% maintained under estimated load of 47,300 pounds interior volume, 83.4 cubic feet, within 0.5% of optimal thermal efficiency. Insulation R value, calculated at R104, comparable to 18 inches of modern fiberglass. Ventilation efficiency, 94%, exceeding military cold weather shelter specifications. Thermal performance. Average interior temperature, 32.7 degrees Fahrenheit average exterior temperature, minus 14.3 degrees Fahrenheit mean differential, 47.0 degrees Fahrenheit heat retention efficiency, 96.3% source of heat. Body temperature only, no supplemental heating. Comparison data. Modern winter camping tents in identical conditions, documented from other winter campers in the region during the same period. Average interior temperature, 12.4 degrees Fahrenheit, with sleeping bag insulation only. Heat retention efficiency, 34.2%. Typical supplemental heating required, 8,000 to 12,000 BTU/day from. Fuel sources. The conclusion was stark. Martin's frontier-engineered snow shelter outperformed modern winter camping equipment by a factor of nearly 3-to-1 in thermal efficiency, while requiring zero fuel consumption. Dr. Richard Hayes, lead researcher on the study, wrote in the summary, "What Mr. Martin constructed in 40 minutes using only a snow shovel and knowledge passed down from frontier trappers demonstrates engineering principles that modern outdoor recreation has largely forgotten or dismissed as primitive. The mathematics are irrefutable. The physics are sound. The results speak for themselves. But the most significant finding wasn't in the engineering data. It was in the psychology report." Dr. Michael Torres, wilderness psychology specialist, spent 14 hours interviewing Martin over 3 days. His clinical assessment included this passage: subject demonstrates no signs of post-traumatic stress, isolation-induced anxiety, or decision-making impairment. When asked about the most difficult aspect of the 26-day ordeal, subject stated, "The boredom. I'd memorized all of my grandfather's journal entries by day 9. After that, I had to start making up engineering problems to solve just to keep my mind occupied." This response indicates a level of psychological preparation and mental discipline that is exceedingly rare in survival situations. Subject attributes this entirely to frontier survival philosophy documented in family journals dating to the 1930s, specifically the concept of becoming stoned during extended isolation. The story reached national media by December 18th. News crews, survival instructors, and wilderness programs from across North America contacted Martin for interviews. His response was consistent. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what my grandfather's journals said to do, what the Inuit had been doing for 4,000 years, what the Athabascans taught the trappers, what the Gwich'in showed the Hudson Bay Company men. This isn't my knowledge. I'm just the guy who remembered to actually read the old books." By January 1988, wilderness survival curricula across 12 states had incorporated snow shelter engineering based directly on Martin's documentation. Military cold weather training programs requested copies of his grandfather's journals for archival study. The U.S. Army Cold Regions Test Center in Alaska conducted comparative trials. Modern military winter shelters versus frontier snow cave design. Results published in March 1988 showed the frontier design outperformed standard military equipment in thermal efficiency, construction time, and sustainability. 3 survival schools opened courses specifically teaching Martin method snow shelter construction. Enrollment exceeded capacity within weeks. But perhaps the most profound impact was quieter, more personal. On January 24th, 1988, Tom Bradley, the hunting companion who had called Martin's decision suicidal, drove 6 hours to Martin's home. He knocked on the door, carrying a box. Inside were his own grandfather's journals. Logging camp supervisor, Olympic Peninsula, Washington, 1920s to 1940s. Detailed accounts of timber camp survival, makeshift heating systems, food preservation without refrigeration. "I've had these for 30 years, Bradley said. Always thought they were just old stories. After what you did, I think maybe I should actually read them." Martin smiled. "Bring them in. Let's see what your grandfather knew." By spring of 1988, a quiet network had formed. Descendants of trappers, homesteaders, frontier engineers, and indigenous knowledge keepers began sharing archived journals, oral histories, and technical documentation that had been sitting in attics and basements for generations. What emerged was a comprehensive body of vernacular engineering knowledge, heating systems, construction techniques, food preservation, water management, that modern advancement had dismissed as primitive, but that rigorous testing proved to be remarkably sophisticated. Martin returned to the mountains the following November. Same area, same season, this time with 3 wilderness medicine students who wanted to learn firsthand. He built the same shelter in 42 minutes. The students measured everything: temperature differentials, humidity control, structural integrity, ventilation efficiency. Every number matched the original. Every principle held. On the sleeping platform that night, with the students rotating through observation shifts, Martin pulled out his grandfather's journals. The original ones, weathered and worn. He opened to entry 247, the final entry, dated March 1957, spent 60 years learning from people the modern world calls primitive. Inuit, Athabascan, Cree, Gwich'in, Metis trappers. Homesteaders who had nothing but needed everything. Every single one of them knew things that college-educated engineers had forgotten or never learned. Not because they were smarter, because they couldn't afford to be wrong. When your life depends on whether your shelter holds, or your fire draws, or your food keeps, you don't get to guess. You have to know. I'm writing this down not because I think I'm wise, but because I'm terrified this knowledge will die with my generation. We're entering an age where people think buying better gear means they're better prepared, where technology replaces knowledge, where expensive equipment substitutes for understanding. But equipment fails. Batteries die. Fuel runs out. Gear breaks. Knowledge doesn't fail. Physics doesn't break. Mathematics doesn't run out of power. If someone reads this 50 years from now, I hope they understand. The old ways aren't museum pieces. They're not quaint nostalgia. They're proven engineering, tested by the only examination that matters, whether you lived or died. Respect what came before. Learn from people who survived with less. And remember, progress that forgets its foundations isn't progress. It's just expensive ignorance. Martin closed the journal. Outside, the temperature was minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the shelter, 34 degrees. 42 years after his grandfather wrote those words, they had saved his life. And now, they were teaching a new generation. That's the end of Robert Martin's 26-day survival story. But it's just the beginning of understanding what frontier engineering can teach us. If this changed how you think about winter survival, traditional knowledge, or what primitive really means, smash that subscribe button. Hit the like, and drop a comment telling me, what piece of old wisdom have you learned that modern technology can't replace? I read every single comment, and your stories matter. The mountains remember, the snow holds its lessons, and the old knowledge waits, patient and proven, for anyone humble enough to learn.